By the time the rays of the early morning dawn began piercing the far horizon, the couple were so exhausted that they were no longer able to continue. They collapsed on a small hill of sand and slept the sleep of the dead. Neither the rays of the warm sun nor the flies and ants swarming over their bodies seemed to awaken them. They slept like logs, without dreams and movement. If someone happened to pass by them, they could well be mistaken for dead corpses. Michael was forced out from sleep by the deafening sound of a helicopter hovering overhead. Christina did not wake up. She was still comatose. Michael was overjoyed, excited at the thought that they had safely crossed the border and were being greeted by a helicopter belonging to the Southern Air Force of the SPLM. He woke up his wife and joyfully informed her that God had answered their prayers and sent help. Then, he showed her the helicopter which was descending overhead. The couple got to their feet, jumping up and down, waving their arms and voices as if they could be heard over the noise. If that helicopter was sent for them, then it was sent by the devil. For the evil of all evils was inside it. It was the terrible man, Khalid Mansour. At first he did not recognize them. His pilot was the one who spotted the two sleeping little people. He told his boss, who instructed him to turn around and return to the place where he had spotted them. By then, Michael had forced his wife out of her deep slumber. When the helicopter turned back, Christina was doing a joyful jig and dance with her husband. Khalid spotted her long hair, and knew then since no black Arab or African could have hair down to her feet. By the time Michael removed his black hat and began to use it to wave to their supposedly angelic helpers, Khalid did not have a single iota of doubt that he had found his quarry. For a few minutes the evil man struggled with the urgent temptation of jumping down out of cockpit and catching the blasphemous slut and killing her with his bare hands. Nothing could give him more pleasure than throttling her and strangling her to death. His enjoyment would know no bounds at the sight of her bulging eyes and extended tongue while she was turned red from her struggles. He would tighten his grip on her neck until she breathed her last in front of him. Then, he would prostrate on the ground and offer prayer of thanksgiving to his Allah who gave him the honor of murdering the blasphemer of his righteous prophet Muhammad. All those thoughts went like a video of a terrorist beheading his defenseless victim in cold blood. But the evil Khalid was not that foolish to jump into his death and let the woman escape again unharmed by him. He consulted his pilot about the possibility of landing somewhere near those two evil foreigners. He knew the couple had somehow assumed that someone came to pick them up and take them to safety. His pilot told him that there was no place that the helicopter could land without risk. Khalid asked his pilot if there was a ladder that they extend for them to climb up on, and the pilot answered in the negative. Khalid Mansour radioed the other planes and advised that they had found the object of their search. Then, he ordered them to come to the place where his helicopter was hovering over the couple like a vulture that had spotted a dead carcass. He did not want anyone to snatch the golden medal from his hands by killing the blasphemous woman before him. Finally, the evil man decided to execute an airstrike on his enemies by shooting them from the sky. He grabbed a long-range rifle and ordered his pilot to keep circling around them so he could shoot. The couple began to feel a bit worried by the prolonged delay of their rescue. First, they expected either someone would throw down a ladder or the helicopter would land close by. Instead, they were greeted with a hail of bullets kicking up the sand around them. The first wave of bullets fell around them and set them on their heels. Michael reacted fast and caught hold of his wife's hand and began to run her out of that open area. Tumbling down the sandy hill, they plunged into the bush. The trees were not tall enough to hide them from their shooter. The helicopter dogged their heels and a shower of bullets followed them in. Michael told his wife to bend down while she was running. His idea worked well since the bush now obscured the shooter's line of sight. Sadly, they were still being tracked. Khalid Mansour was not only a born killer, but he was an evil genius. He had been hoping for a lucky shot, knowing that a moving target from a helicopter was a difficult if not impossible situation. Changing tactics, he decided to change his tactics and settled upon another method with a higher degree of kill probability. He decided to burn them alive and enjoy the show from the safety of his high perch. He knew he could do that by bombing them. He deduced that just 2 or 3 incendiaries would be able to set the entire area on fire. Likewise, a few rockets could blow them to pieces. Once again, the couple were rudely surprised by the first bomb just a few meters from their hiding spot. By then, they had run out of breath and had no further reserves on energy to call upon. They found a few trees and hid under the canopies. From where they were hiding they could not see the helicopter, but the chop of its blades announced its proximity. Before they could do anything, another bomb fell close by. Michael and Christina felt the end had come, unavoidable and final. They concluded that any moment their bodies were going to be blown into pieces. Michael asked his wife again to forgive him for bringing her to that dark part of the world and causing her untimely death through such horrible end. For the first time, since they met, Christina showed more faith in God than her husband. She reminded him of his last night prayer and the verses that he read for her, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Psalm 23:4. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. Psalm 91:5. After reading those 2 verses back to her frightened husband, Christina told him that no matter what danger was surrounding us now, we should be unbending in our trust in God. Our God shut the mouths of the lions and quenched the fire of burning furnace to save those who trust in Him. The same God is alive and He is still their salvation. Michael, faith revived, began praying with a call to God for their deliverance. The evil Janus scheme worked as expected. The 3 bombs were dropped in a triangular pattern. The tinder dry scrub and grass began to ignite and the flames set the trees on fire. In short time, the evil man could see the 2 foreigners were surrounded by the rising flames from his lofty perch. He knew that they had no way of escape. They could not possibly outrun the flames and the choking smoke. A wall of flames surrounded them. He had a clear window of opportunity for a shot, but he restrained himself, preferring to have them burn. He laughed sarcastically and said to his pilot, "As infidels, let them taste some of the fires of hell before they enjoy the real hell fires forever." Just as he uttered his order, the helicopter lurched as if hit by a bolt of lightning from the heavens. Fire, fed by aviation fuel, engulfed it. The couple had a better view of it from ground zero. They looked up just in time to see a rocket homing in on its fuselage, turning it into a lofty ball of fire. It was a flying balloon of bright flame, continuing to fly until it crashed somewhere in the bush, the rising smoke and flames marking its final place of rest. The couple had seen it all but were at a loss as to what actually happened, caught by surprise like the crew of the helicopter. Only the man who fired the rocket knew the full story. A soldier of the South Sudanese People Liberation Movement, SPLM, he spotted the helicopter and positively identified its call sign and insignia as that of the accursed Black Arabs of North Sudan. He was not authorized to use deadly force without a direct order from a higher authority. Calling in his intel, the military headquarters at Juba City convened an emergency meeting to decide on the disposition of trespassing intruder. The attending generals collectively agreed to bring the aircraft down with deadly force. Thus ordered, the soldier happily complied. This time, the evil Khalid could not cheat his fate. He was roasted alive and his evil soul departed from it to descend to Hades. He was kept in that place of torment until the day he would stand before the white throne of Christ and be judged, condemned, and cast into the lake of fire, where he would spend his eternity with the devil, the Antichrist, and his false prophet Mohammed and their followers from the evil spirits and condemned human beings. Nevertheless, his evil continued to work after his demise and haunt the living. The helicopter had just refueled and carried a full complement of aviation fuel and munitions. Combined, they made for an explosion like a cataclysmic nuclear explosion of a nova, creating a huge balloon of flames, spreading out a circle of flames in the bush and forming in the sky a stellar explosion of a supernova. It was like someone doused the area with kerosene, then showered it with gasoline and set it afire. In his death, he became like one of those 19 evil Muslim terrorists who hijacked planes to carry out that cowardly attacks against the Twin Towers in New York City in September 11, 2001. Whether one should consider it a mere coincidence or count it as a divine retribution that the man who brutally killed 2 innocent nuns was horribly burnt alive until his body was fully cooked and then overcooked to finally assume the shape of an unidentifiable black ghost, is academic. The other terrorists in the squadron reached in time to catch a glimpse of the incoming rocket homing in on their lead aircraft. They witnessed the rocket as it hit the helicopter of their Lucifer, engulfing it in fire. They guessed who had shot it down. They also knew their leader had perished in the horrific crash. Instead, for mourning him, all of them were overjoyed. They were glad that their Allah at last rid them of that tyrant whose presence used to cause them to urinate in their underwear. Fearing to meet the same end as their evil leader, all helicopters turned back and flew back to friendlier skies lest they too meet the same fate. The couple found themselves being surrounded with flames in all directions. With all escape routes cut off, they gave up hope and surrendered to their unavoidable death. They stopped praying and trusting in God for rescue anymore. Before the onset of the flames, thick billowing smoke started to engulf them. Coughs and tears accompanied the acrid, superheated air, visibility dropping to a few feet. The place became as hot as hell. They embraced each other and waited. They stopped talking to each other. They felt that was the only thing they could do now was to die in each other's arms. Even that kind of honorable death was denied to them. Christina fainted and her body began to crumble. Michael was weakened to the point that he could not hold her up. He just managed to lay her body down. He felt as if he was putting his beloved's body to its final rest on the ground. If he could, he would have dug a grave and bury her body in it before those angry flames would consume it. Instead of digging a grave, Michael prostrated over the body of his beloved and covered it by his body. He thought the fire might consume his body and spare his beloved's. The smoke became too much for him to inhale it anymore. Asphyxia tightened its grip on him, bringing the onset of unconsciousness. He embraced his wife and tightened his grip on her. Alone with thoughts of his situation, Michael broke out in sobs and cries, saddened by the fate destined for his wife. He wished that it was him all alone in that scary place, doomed to die a lonely death without anyone knowing or shedding tears for him. It is said that only when man loses all hope in life that the divine rescue will come. That was exactly what happened in those critical moments. After Michael gave all hope, then God dropped a tiny idea in his mind. It just flashed as lightning and lit everything with stunning clarity. At that very last moment, Michael suddenly remembered a movie he watched when he was 7 or 8 years old. What happened at the end of that movie was exactly what his beloved and he were going through in that desperate situation. The heroine and the hero were surrounded with huge flames of fire. The heroine fainted and collapsed on the ground. The hero fell on her body and covered it with his body. But he did not just wait for the flames to come and consume his body and the body of his heroine. He did something and saved her life and his life. When he saw that movie as a child, he believed it. But, as a grown-up, he would view the same scene with some serious doubts. But as they also say, a drowning man will clutch at a straw. Michael jumped on his feet and ran towards the flames. He took hold of a stick, which he tore off from a small dry emaciated tree. He lit his torch with the encroaching flames and ran back to where Christina lay on the ground. He began to burn the grass around her. He burned some area around her body and then put the fire off. He continued to do that until he made a small perimeter of black ash around them. In less than a minute of accomplishing this, the flames had reached them. He bent over the body of his beloved and covered her as if a fiery dragon had come to consume her. The heat of the fire was unbearable. He felt as his flesh singing and his clothes charring. He concluded ironically that the scene in his childhood movie was simply a movie magic, an idea unworkable in real life. The smoke overcame him and he fainted too. It was Christina who first regained her consciousness. She struggled for some time trying to get her unconscious lover off her. She managed somehow to slide out from beneath him and extricated herself. She tried standing but she fell flat on her face. She lacked control over her body, her limbs dormant and slow to respond. She stopped her ineffective movements and looked around. Her wandering eyes scanned the periphery and came to a dead stop when Michael came into her narrowed field of vision. Dazed, she had totally forgotten her husband. It was like she was sleepwalking. She could not fully grasp what she was seeing and experiencing. She was experiencing amnesia. She knew she had seen that person before but she couldn't remember his name. Worse, she realized that she didn't know who she herself was. Reduced to depending on instinct, she reacted like a newborn animal, fully aware and cognizant but without the benefit of experience and knowledge. The entire traumatic experience had just robbed her of her identity. Curiosity led her to crawl to the Michael's body and touch it. She jerked her hand back because he was hot to the touch, deciding not to touch him again. She was suddenly aware of an overwhelming desire to drink water. Her tongue was dry and it rasped against the roof of her mouth. She found it impossible to walk, much less talk. As her strength returned, she started looking for water. It was then that bits and pieces of her memory came back to her. She vaguely remembered the events leading up to her current situation. She remembered the shooting, bombs, and ferocious flames licking the savannah. She remembered her husband. At that moment, she realized the comatose person before her was none other than her lover, Michael. Emotions rushed and filled her entire being. She could not move or cry. She could smell death filling the air that she was breathing. The smell of the completely scorched and blackened land around her confirmed her fears. For the first time she felt that she had lost him forever. The impending dread that her husband was dead galvanized her into movement. She forced herself to crawl over to him and instead of tentatively touching him, she fell on him. She dug deep into her reserves and turned him over, nesting him in her arms. Seeing no response, she shook him violently as if in anger. A feeling of helplessness overwhelmed her which only subsided when he revived, opening his eyes painfully and staring blankly at her. All opposing emotions crowded her chest, suffocating her, effectively choking her throat. All at once she wanted to cry, laugh, shout, bewail, rejoice, mourn, dance, crawl, and die and yet live again. Michael was able to regain his senses more quickly than she did. He remembered everything. He now knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what David meant when he said, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." What they had gone through was nothing less than what David had been forced to endure, which led him to write that wonderful, inspiring psalm. Michael's faith in God solidified like iron. It became a matter of fact to him that there is God in heaven watching over his children and he is sovereign over everything, and nothing can happen without his knowledge and predestined will. Michael could now say proudly and with full confidence in tandem with Isaiah, "When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him." Isaiah 59:19. Michael began to worry about his beloved when he saw her darkened face, bearing the mark of smoke and flames. He also noticed how her mouth and tongue were parched like old paper. Her tears were falling like flood out of her blackened eyes. She tried to talk to him but her voice failed her. She just kept weeping and smiling at the same time and looking at him without blinking, as if he might disappear in the space of a blink. Michael told her to sit where she was and wait for him. He promised to return shortly. He remembered where they slept before the helicopter attack. He reasoned that the person who came in that cockpit of death was none other than the officer Babakir Hussein Osama. He remembered the rocket that brought down the aircraft, and the fiery explosion. Michael backtracked to the small hill of sand and fetched their belongings, returning at once to his beloved. He neither drank nor ate from his rations until his beloved had satisfied her thirst and assuaged her hunger. They both drank and ate from the same heavenly manna which their godmother had given them at her charity home. After their souls revived and their bodies refreshed, Michael narrated to Christina what had happened after she fell unconscious in his arms. He told her that it was the hand of God that saved them from imminent death. He explained to her how he burnt the grass around her body to starve the advancing flames of fuel. He knew and understood that the fire can't burn twice the place it has already burnt. He then explained to his beloved the movie he had watched when he was just a child. He had learned that idea from his childhood movie. He then surmised that the billowing smoke had rendered him unconscious as the fire burnt around them. Nevertheless, he refused to credit for his knowledge or ability but gave all the glory and praise to God who illuminated that dim childhood memory and used it to save their lives. Christina fully agreed with him and likewise gave thanks to the Lord who alone miraculously preserved their lives. The couple's next concern was to continue their journey. They decided to move quickly as far as they could from that valley of death. The fire had burnt huge area and turned everything black. Even the trees became like ominous shadows of ghosts. Everything around them reeked of death and destruction. Once again, they found themselves facing the unknown. Once again, they resumed their hazardous and uncertain journey toward the south of Sudan border. Without a map or compass, they placed their hopes and their unwavering faith in the God of heaven, Jehovah, who took the children of Israel upon the wings of eagles and brought them through that terrible wilderness of Sinai to their promised land, today's Israel. The couple began to sing one of their favorite songs, "For the captain of the host is Jesus and we are following in his footsteps and no foe can stand against us in the land." Then, they prayed and encouraged each other with many promising verses which they had memorized by heart. After that, they resumed their trip. They had no inkling that they had already crossed the border and were already standing on the south of Sudan soil during the air raid. Soon enough, they had forgotten what God had done for them. And after all the promising verses and prayers and inspired songs, the couple's faith quickly began to waver when they entered the rich savanna where the trees were no longer shorter than them. Nightfall buried them in darkness. The trees gradually started becoming taller and growing denser and denser. It appeared that the further they went, the more the terrain looked like a jungle. The couple had been told that the jungle of the south of Sudan had lions, leopards, elephants, unicorns, wild buffaloes, and hyenas. Among all the beasts, the hyenas were the most dangerous. Africans believed that the lion would attack you only when it was hungry, but the hyena like a human being in that it would attack regardless if it was hungry or not. After killing you, it would bury your body in a shallow pit until it decomposed and then it would devour it when it was hungry. Another devious habit of the hyena, like a terrorist, it would not attack you face to face. It would attack at a time that you would not be expecting it, preferring the element of surprise from the rear. It would follow you the whole night until you fell asleep and then it would attack you when you were unarmed and unprepared for the fight with it. I guess the Muslim terrorists had learned their cowardly tactics of attacking the non-combatants from the example of the African hyena. There was also a great possibility that the tis-tis fly might bite Michael and Christina. No one would know that a tis-tis fly had bitten him until he fell asleep forever. Even nature seemed not to favor Michael and Christina in the jungle. They had not covered more than a couple of kilometers before the rain come down in sheets. Wordlessly, they knew any further progress would be impossible in the stormy rains of Africa. They had expected to be attacked and killed by wild beasts or human beasts, but not by natural disasters such as heavy rain, wind, and flood. They had been making their way along an unpaved, roughly hewn road. Due to the long-lasting civil war between the northern troops and the southern rebels, all roads and highways were neglected for many years and nature had reclaimed her own. The couple had no choice except to discontinue their journey and seek safe shelter for the night. They could hardly sit in the middle of the road and let the rain drench them. Soon the road would be a mire of mud or the conduit for a flash flood. As the water inundated the landscape, it would soon drive the snakes out and displace them everywhere in the water. In that regard, the safest place, relatively speaking, is to do as the monkeys do and spend the night clinging to the tree tops on the most comfortable bough you could reach. If you could manage to remain awake throughout the night in that miserable position without falling asleep and falling headlong and breaking your neck, and if you had avoided lightning strikes, then you might dodge the sword of Damocles and survive one of the deadliest situations in the jungle of south of Sudan. The American couple, therefore, climbed up the tallest tree they could find and made their bedding on top of its branches. Michael as usual made a heroic sacrifice and convinced his beloved to spend the night sleeping like a baby on his lap while he remained awake throughout the night. He covered her and himself with a small blanket that had been given to them at the charity home. The blanket was thick and hence became like a small tent, but did little to keep the sheets of water drenching them, chilling them to the bone. Even though, something was better than nothing, and the blanket became to them as valuable as spending their second night in a 5-star hotel in that scary jungle.